تشغيل الجهاز ورجعت من جديد في نيويورك و also a clinical research scientist. الموضوع اللي راح نتكلم عليه اليوم كلكم عارفين الدسكشن writing a research paper discussion. I thought I'd just give a brief intro of discussion in general بس قبل ما أبدأ راح أعطيكم بعض النقاط بصورة عامة. The presentation is not very long يعني قصير because يعني at the end of the day discussion is an important part بس المعلومات اللي فيها كل يعني أشياء مرة بسيطة وخفيفة فيعني حاولت قد ما أقدر إني أعطي كل نقطة يعني أشرحها بشكل موجز وبسيط. الشيء الثاني إنه البرزنتيشن بقوله باللغة الإنجليزية بس لو في أسئلة أظن المفروض إن هذا نفس الزوم اللي نستخدمه هنا في خانة حق الأسئلة فلو في أسئلة أو أي نقطة اكتبوا لي تحت وإن شاء الله على النهاية يعني حيكون عندنا وقت طويل حق الأسئلة أو أي موضوع يعني له علاقة بالدسكشن أقدر أجاوبكم عليه. The reason is ليه بسوي الدسكشن أو البرزنتيشن باللغة الإنجليزية لأنه أصلا يعني في نهاية اليوم كلنا نكتب البيبرز باللغة الإنجليزية الدراسة باللغة الإنجليزية فقلت هذا أسهل طريقة إني أوصل فيها الموضوع. وده يعني هذه بس المقدمة كمقدمة بسيطة. فالحين قبل ما أبدأ so like I said today's subject is about the discussion writing a research paper. So I'll start again. Before I start any presentation, when it comes to clinical research or clinical research papers, I always like to take my students back and remember what are the research paper components and what is the purpose of research. And I'm pretty sure by today, like all of you have written a research paper or read a million research papers. So by now, you know what are the important components of any research paper. We have the abstract that tells us the summary of the research paper, which like we all know, it has a little bit brief of a background, it has methods, it has results, and it has a conclusion. And then we have the actual research paper, which has all the weight of the research. We start with the introduction, which is the background, and then we have the methods, aims, depending on how you're writing it and what are the guidelines and where are you submitting your paper. And then we have the results section, and after the results section, we have the discussion part, which is our main topic for today. After the discussion or in the discussion, we have the conclusion part. I've heard a lot of students and a lot of people are actually terrified when it comes to writing a research paper. And honestly, like I've been asking around just to figure out why are people terrified from writing a research paper. I'll explain two important things during my presentation, which will show where are the points where people are usually get stuck in or stuck with when writing a research paper. So let's just go back and remember, take a deep breath and remember what is the purpose of research. Why are we doing research? We are doing research because we have an idea. We have a research question in mind and we have a hypothesis. We want to prove whether this hypothesis is right or wrong. And by having the data and analyzing the data, you can come up with the answer or understanding. So in research, there is no definitive answer. Like you can't just say, oh, I'm 100% sure this is the answer to my question. You're trying to understand the answer to your question. So this is the main purpose of research. Excuse me. And so in the discussion part, it is actually one of the most important, if not the most important part of your research paper. Because in the discussion part, you are actually explaining, you're not just listing whatever results you have or whatever numbers that you came up with or figures. You're explaining the findings and you're explaining it in a way that is your own way. So it's like you own your paper, you own your discussion. It's the part of the research paper that you actually put your effort, you put your thoughts into. And the results part, you're just writing the results that you came up with from the analysis, but in the discussion part, you're actually putting your critical thinking in the paper. Basically, it's like you're describing how you think in a form of a paper. So it says a lot about you. It says a lot about your project. It says a lot about what you think and what your results mean. And this is why I honestly think the discussion part is very important. Now, what is the goal of discussion section? So during these slides, you'll see that I'm explaining and even repeating myself in some of the parts, because first of all, they're important, and you have, like, if I keep repeating the same sentences, I believe that it'll stick in your mind and you'll always remember it. Second of all, because there are a lot of stuff that are connected. So the goal of discussion section is to explain and describe the significance of your findings. Now, why did I write significance in bold? Because if I simply just say, I'm just going to describe the findings and this is the goal of discussion section, then where does this bring me to? It brings me back to the results section, because in the results section, you're actually describing the findings. يعني في القسم حق الريزلتس انت عندك findings او انت عندك finding في الاناليسز من الستاتستكس، فقط تعرضين الفايندينجز. والله طلعت لي النتيجه هذه odds ratio is significant or not, p value is this, but you're not actually describing this. ما قاعده يعني توصفين، او يعني مو بس توصفين، يعني تقولين ايش، او تقول ايش significance of the findings، يعني ايش اهميه انه طلع لي والله p value is significant. هذا يعني all of these results البارتس كتبناه في الريزلتس حق قسم الريزلتس في البيبر، بس الدiscussion part تتكلم عن significance of these results، أهمية هذه الريزلتس اللي طلعت لك، يعني ايش استفدت وايش اخذت وايش فهمت من البي فاليو اللي كتبتها فوق، من الodds ratio اللي كتبتها ايش يعني. فالgoal of discussion section is to explain and describe the significance of your findings. So كبداية دائما حطوا في بالكم إن الدسكشن first of all مو شيء مخيف. أنا عندي فوق الريزلتس، قبل الريزلتس عندي أصلا الأيم حق الستدي، الحين حاجي بس أشرحها، بقول أنا إيش أهمية الريزلتس اللي طلعت لي، هذا بصورة عامة. So again, the goal of discussion section is to explain and describe the significance of your findings. Now, like I said, it's not very difficult, and why am I saying this? Because the information that you're going to use to write your discussion section is already there. You have the information. عندك كل المعلومات اللي تحتاجها. What are these information? You're going to need findings from your current analysis, like I said, previous information from literature review to compare your findings to, and of course, and it's the important part of the discussion is your brain. You need your brain. You need your critical thinking. So المعلومات اللي نحتاجها، يعني هذا بقوله بالعربي بكرره كثير، المعلومات اللي نحتاجها في الدiscussion part هي معلومات عندنا. المعلومة الأولية والمهمة اللي الفايندينجز، الريزلتس، النتائج، التحليلات الحسابية والstatistics اللي طلعناه، وعندنا البارت، كتبنا البارت already. We have it in the results section موجود. القسم الثاني حق المعلومات من وين نحتاجه أو من وين راح ناخذه؟ من الليترشر ريفيو، المعلومات أو نتائج التحليلات اللي من الستاديز القديمة. إحنا already كاتبين الباك جراوند، كاتبين الليترشر قبل ما نبتدي البحث أصلاً، كنا قارين وعندنا ليترشر ريفيو ونعرف والله أنا بسوي هذا البحث لأن عندي ريزلتس من بحث قديم تقول كذا كذا، أنا بشوف إذا الريزلتس حقتي تثبت هذا الشيء أو لازم، يعني فعندك المعلومات من all literature. أهم نقطة وأهم شيء المخ عندنا، يعني we have to use our brain. هذا الفاصل اللي يخليك تعرف إنه والله this discussion section is a good discussion section، ولا ها بس copy paste جمع المعلومات وأنا ما فهمت، ما ضاف لي شيء. findings from your current analysis, previous information from literature review, and your brain. And I'm going to talk about these in details in a bit. Like, what do I mean when I say literature review to compare your findings to in a bit? Now, when you write a discussion section, always think and ask yourself, what is the meaning of your findings in context of what is already known? Am I repeating myself? Am I rearranging information that I have previously written in the paper? Always, like when you start writing, always ask yourself these questions. Remind yourself that what you want to write in the discussion section is something unique. I don't want to show any weakness in terms of my writing. And when I say weakness in terms of writing, I don't only mean the technicality of writing, like English writing. I meant, am I repeating myself? Is it weak? Because like I'm just repeating the information all over again that I've already written in the previous sections. Am I trying to connect to the reader in a good way that I'm trying to explain the meaning of these findings? So always keep yourself reminded by these 3 points while writing. Now, why is writing a good discussion important? Remember when I started this presentation, I said I believe that discussion part of the research paper is a very good or very important part, if not the most important part of the research paper. Now, why am I saying this? Because in the discussion part, it is actually your way as a researcher to demonstrate your critical thinking. So imagine me, I don't know, for example, Dr. X. I don't know who this guy is, but I'm reading his paper. Now, I'm not saying it's a form of judgment, like I'm not going to judge, but it gives me a good idea of how this person critical thinking is. You get to express yourself in the writing form in the discussion section. A good discussion tells the underlying meaning of your research. It could fill the gaps in literature. A good discussion makes the reader engage in and remember your research. I don't know why I keep getting these. Sorry. Okay. So like I said, actually an important part of why a good discussion is very important. I'm pretty sure that you as students sat in a meeting and have heard doctors saying, oh, like, do you remember that paper that was written by so-and-so, like a person, and they mention a person name, and that person is not actually working with them in the hospital, or maybe is not, that person is not even in Saudi or like in the same country that you guys are in. But why do they remember, like, why do you think to yourself, how come they remembered that person? They actually remembered that person because of how strong his paper is from reading it. And how do you communicate the strength of your paper? Of course, by the strength of your research in general, but also the strength of your writing a discussion section. So a good discussion actually is a good way for people to remember or know how you think and what is your critical thinking looking like. Like I said in the last point, a good discussion makes the reader engage in and remember your research. And I always like to think of it as a story in a way, like, I'm pretty sure, like, I always like to explain my ideas in like story format. So imagine you sitting with your friends, and I'm pretty sure we all have that one friend who tells a story but no one listens to, or maybe they do listen to, like, we listen to that friend, but his way of telling stories, not everyone is a good storyteller. So not everyone is a good research or like good writer, but we can always improve. And the way to improve is always to think of it as a story. Am I conveying my message? Is it interesting enough for the reader to actually keep reading? And I'm pretty sure a lot of us have came across that one paper where you started reading and you just got lost in the middle. Or maybe started reading and got actually bored. So you see all of these signs make you think of, oh, what are the weak points of this paper? Is it because of the ideas are not well connected? The writing is not that good. It's not engaging enough. So always try your best to make the reader engage when you write. Always remind yourself, I'm telling my way through this discussion section. So this is why the discussion section is very important. The difficulties. Okay. So the difficulties are actually they always revolve around these two parts. It's either the content part or the writing part. I get a lot of comments or a lot of questions or like basically a lot of comments about the content. Like, what do we write? Like, what are we supposed to write in the discussion part? Isn't it the same as the results part? Should I repeat myself? What's the point from the discussion part? So that is one part of the difficulties when it comes to people actually explaining or actually just like talking about discussion. The second difficulties arise in the writing part, which is an important part as well. Because even if you have all the information and your content is very strong, when your writing is weak, then at the end results is not going to be as good as what you expected it to be. So you have to have a good balance and a good ability in both of these parts. The content has to be strong, the writing has to be strong as well. بتكلم بالعربية الحين. دائما أسمع medical students يعني يخافوا من discussion، من writing in general. دائما السؤال أو النقطة الأولى، من وين نبدأ؟ ما نعرف وين نبدأ. إيش الدسكشن؟ أنا already كتبت، يعني مثلا يقول لك كتبت الريزلتس، أجي أعيدها الحين في الدسكشن بارت، إيش لازم أضيف؟ أحس أسهل نقطة أو أسهل طريقة إنك يعني بينك وبين نفسك تفكر إنه مو صعب، أنا عندي كل المعلومات، مرة مو صعب. الدسكشن يعني من أهم الأجزاء، ومن جد من أسهل الأجزاء، لأن المعلومات عندك جاهزة، والبحث أنت اللي بدأت فيه، أنت اللي تعرف أهمية البحث. يعني ما في أحد غيرك يعرف أهمية البحث ويقدر يوصل المعلومة غيرك أنت. فيعني عندك كل شيء ممكن عشان تكتب really good discussion part. الحين الجزء الثاني، سو الجزء الأول هذا اللي الناس دائما تخاف منه، أن أنا إيش أكتب في الدسكشن، إيش المعلومات اللي أحتاجها، من وين أبدأ. فدائما خذ ورقة وقلم، أبدأ بشويش. خلاص أنا عندي المعلومات اللي قبل شوي تكلمنا عليها، عندي معلومات الريزلت الحالية، عندي معلومات الريزلت اللي جمعتها أنا في فترة كتابة المعلومات عن الريسيرش، عندي معلومات ريزلت من ريسيرش بيبرز قديمة، وعندي مخي يعني أهم شيء عندي المخ اللي جاب الريسيرش ايديا، اللي كتب الريسيرش كويستشن، المخ اللي أبغى أقنع الناس أنا ليش الريسيرش حقي يعني مرة مهم، وإيش النقطة اللي أبغى أوصلها. فأنت عندك الحين جميع المعلومات حق الفيرست بارت، content part. So this should not be difficult. You have everything you need. It's there. It's ready. يعني once you reach this part, you're actually ready to start writing. النقطة الثانية اللي الناس تخاف منها writing part. يعني في ناس تنشغل إنها كم paragraph لازم أكتب، كم كلمة لازم أكتب، إيش أبدأ، كيف أبدأ، بأي صيغة أبدأ، بالpast tense should I start with the present tense, what should I start with، أكتب أي نقاط أكتب. يعني فكل الأشياء المهمة اللي لازم تبدون فيها هي من جد إنه بس تنظمون أفكاركم. الرايتنج بارت ممكن صح في ناس ضعيفة في الساينتفك رايتنج، أنا بالنهاية بقول لكم يعني بعض النقاط من أهم الأشياء اللي لازم يعني تعرفونها قبل بداية أي ريسيرش، إنه تكتب إيش الويكنس حقك. في أحد يقول والله أنا من جد الرايتنج عندي ضعيف in general، فأنا عشان كذا متخوف من الدسكشن، لأن ترى الدسكشن بارت من أكثر البارتس في الريسيرش بيبر اللي يبين فيها الرايتنج، واللي أكثر البارتس اللي ممكن الريفيور لما تقدموا البيبر عند جورنال يرجعوها، إنه مثلا عادي يكون الكومنت مو كومنت علمي، يكون الكومنت إنه اللغة ضعيفة، مو اللغة ضعيفة بمعنى بس الجرامر، لا يعني حتى لو لغتك الأولى إنجليزية ممكن الأسلوب، الكلمات المستخدمة، تكرار الكلام. فالرايتنج بارت يعني لا تحط في مخك لأن أنت لغتك الأولى ممكن مو اللغة الإنجليزية فأنا أكيد حكون ضعيف في كتابة الدسكشن. لا، هذا مرة غلط، لأن في ناس مرة كثير لغتهم الأولى لغة إنجليزية وضعيفين في الكتابة. فيعني it starts in your head، من جد يعني it starts in your head. Don't be scared and يعني حددوا نقاط الضعف ابدأوا فيها. Content part you have the information. Writing part I'll give you some tips in a bit والباقي عليكم. Yeah. So now writing. Rules and tips. Number one, be concise and to the point. This is one of the important, like it sounds easy, but people actually forget about it. And once you start writing, some people just like keep on writing. They just keep on writing. And there's this opposite kind of people that will start writing and be like, oh no, I want to be very concise and I'm not going to write a lot of ideas and just end up writing very few information. So you have to be in the middle. You have to be concise. You have to be up to the point where you want to convey your message. What do you want to explain to the reader? يعني لا تكتبوا تطلعوا يعني تكتبوا المعلومة الأساسية وتطلعوا عنها وتشوفوا نفسكم دخلتوا في معلومات مرة كثيرة يعني والأفكار تكون مشتتة. في الجهة الثانية لا تبخس يعني الحق حق الريسيرش، يعني لا تكتب بس تقول خلاص أنا الحين قالوا لي be concise and to the point. I'm just going to write this one sentence in each. I'm very concise and to the point. يعني ما كتبت هنا discussion، أنت قاعد تكتب points. حتى لو جمعت الجمل ورا بعضها وسوت paragraph, that's still not a very good paragraph. So لازم الاعتدال. Be concise and to the point. Avoid repetitiveness. Like I said earlier, do not repeat yourself. Do not repeat yourself. This is one of the common mistakes. I've honestly seen a lot of papers that people just like literally copy paste sentences from the results section into the discussion section and might just like add a sentence or two. Do not do this. This is really bad for a lot of reasons. Not only because you're just repeating yourself, it's actually gonna make me as a reader avoid reading any future papers by you. It'll affect you as a person and it'll affect your research. You want your research to be the beginning of like future good research papers, and you want the reader to like your research and be engaging and have critical thinking with you as you go along and write your discussion party. So always remind yourself, do not be repetitive. And if you tend to be repetitive, it's okay, just highlight those sentences where you think you've copied them from the previous sections and try to come up with another way of conveying your message. The third tip is to use clear scientific words. Again, I know that I've said deal with your research and like think of it as a story, but also don't just use loose terms or words that are not strong or 3-4 different words for the same idea. Just use very clear language, very clear scientific words and make it as strong as it can be. So now coming to the writing technicality, use, when it comes to verbs, use the present tense for the current findings. For example, you can say, this shows this and this, like this result shows this and this, and use past for previous findings, like previous research or previous analysis showed this and this. So always, like this is the general tip of writing, actually, the discussion part. Present tense for your current findings, past tense for the previous findings. And it makes sense, past for past, present for present. You can always also use subheadings if needed. There is no one set criteria for writing a discussion section, but I've seen a lot of papers. It depends, again, it depends on what kind of clinical research or research paper you're writing. Some researches are actually long, like genetic papers, and they have a lot of like headings, which is okay. So just try to mold your discussion according to how your research findings are. So these are the general rules and tips. The content. So this is, remember the first part where I said a lot of people are also hesitant or don't know what to start. So this shows the, like what should be there in the content in terms of what you're writing in your discussion. Number one, results, explanation, expected versus unexpected. And this is very important. Do not just like tend to ignore one result and just like pick on the results that you want. And I've also seen this in a lot of papers. People would just like pick the results that are most appealing, or like the results that they think will help them support their hypothesis. But this is not good. Just be honest and start with all the results, explain them, expected versus unexpected results. If you have an unexpected result, just state that. Number two, use results from previous research to compare to or to support. Why do we use results from previous research in the discussion section? Because you either want to compare your results to something from the past that has been circulating and say like, oh, our results shows this and this compared to what has been seen in the prior research, and you mention it. Or you can support your results by mentioning prior research analysis. Maybe your research shows results that are consistent with prior research, and it adds to the evidence. So that's a form of support. Number three in the content is application of your results. Recommendations, practices. You've already explained your results. You've linked to your results to the prior research papers. Now you have, as a researcher, you have to tell the reader, where do you think your results could be applicable? What can we benefit from your results? Do you have any recommendations? Is this going to help guidelines, practices? Or maybe this is something entirely new and it's hypothesis generating, or so you always have to include that in the discussion part. And this is why, again, discussion part is very important. At the end is a possible conclusion and claim from your results. And I've seen also a lot of papers that include the conclusion, like the main conclusion of the paper, in the results section, or there is a shorter conclusion at the end. But always in your discussion part, you have to also write like a paragraph of conclusion. I'll say this in Arabic again, because this is very important. بشرح بالعربي هذه الأربع نقاط مرة مهمة. هي الكونتنت أو المحتوى حق الدسكشن بارت. رقم واحد، المحتوى الشرح للنتائج الإحصائية. ولما نقول شرح للنتائج الإحصائية لازم الشرح يكون على النتائج اللي أنت توقعتها والنتائج اللي طلعت غير متوقعة. حتى لو كانت النتائج الغير متوقعة ما تساعدك أنت، ما تخدم الهايبوثيسز، ممكن عكس الشيء اللي أنت تقوله. بالعكس يعني you have to be honest، لازم تكون صريح وصادق في عرض وشرح الريزلتس. رقم اثنين، أنت الحين شرحت الريزلتس حقك، تربط الريزلت بالأبحاث والريزلت حق الأبحاث القديمة اللي أنت already تكلمت عنها في maybe في الباك جراوند section. ليش نعرضها في الدiscussion part؟ لأن أنت لما تشرح أو أنت لما تشرحين النتيجة حقتك هذه النتيجة تربطينها، الريسيرش كله ربط في بعض، يعني ما في بس توصلنا إلى نتيجة نهائية بسبب ريسيرش واحد، لا كله evidence. we're compiling evidence، نجمع evidence. فأنت لما عرضت النتيجة تجيب ال evidence من prior research وتقارنينها بال evidence اللي عندك. هل هذا ال evidence عكس ال evidence اللي طلع لي أو ال results اللي طلعت لي من research؟ وليش أتوقع إنه عكس؟ أو ال evidence حقي أو ال results حقي يعززوا نفس ال results حقي اللي قبل، فممكن تقول إن this is supportive. رقم 3 الابليكيشنز. انت الحين عرضت الايفيدنس، عرضت الاناليسيس، شرحته، you explained it، قلت السيجنيفيكانس. رقم 3 تقول ايش فائده السيجنيفيكانس. الحين انا لما الحمد لله وصلت الى نتيجه وانا احس ان هذه النتيجه مرضيه، ولما اقول مرضيه مو معناتها فقط بوزيتيف، ممكن حتى نيجاتيف، يعني اضافت لي معلومات ايش ممكن تضيف في العالم الطبي بصوره عامه. هل انا ممكن اضيف بغير practices guidelines؟ طبعا كله يعتمد على هدف حقك حق الريسيرش. انت ما بدأت الريسيرش الا عندك هدف معين، انت ما اخترت هذا الموضوع الا في هدف، فهنا تقول وتربطه بالريزلت حقك. اخر شيء الكونكلوجن، حق النقطة الأساسية أو النقاط الأساسية اللي هي أصلا الهايبوثيسيس حقك you conclude في discussion part. The structure. Again, I'm just repeating myself here because I want the idea to be with you all the time and to always remember it, because it's not difficult. You start with a very general, wide idea. You start generally with the main concept of your research. You go specific into details. You go specific into results. You link it to literature and theory, like I said, and then you link it to practice. Start general, go specific, link it to literature and theory, and then link it to practice. Now, the writing process. So just before I begin, this is a reminder that this is not a rule. There is no set criteria unless you're submitting your paper for a journal or maybe a grant. It's for a grant, or those entities will actually give you the guidelines and will tell you like, oh, we need this links, we need these number of words or these number of paragraphs. So accordingly, you'll modify and you'll write your paper, but generally the length is not longer than the sum of the previous sections, like the sum of the background, methods, results. So generally it's the length of the discussion part is not longer than all of these combined. And it's usually completed in 6 to 7 paragraphs, but again, this is not a rule, and you always have to think of it, modify it as you go, modify it as to whom you're going to submit it to. It's generally the idea in general when you start writing your discussion, always have in mind that start with an intro paragraph, an intermediate paragraph, and finally conclusion paragraph. The intro paragraph in general, it'll just you might just talk generally about how important is your research or significance, and then you go into the intermediate paragraphs, which then you will talk about the results, and then at the end is the conclusion paragraph of the entire discussion part. So I saw this very interesting graph online, and it shows, it's just a map in your head how, like, to begin with, we have the results, right? And we've already written the results in the results section. And we all know that there are millions of results that we get. Focus on the important results. And then each result, write them down. Each result, try to form your paragraph, your idea in the discussion section about it. And then for that result, that one main idea, you introduce it, you write an introduction, just few sentences. your opinions, like I said, significance of this result, and then you try to link it. And the outcomes, meaning your recommendations. Where does this take me to? Why is this important? Now that I said it's important, how does this add anything to either the population, the practices, and an important part, as you can see at the end of it, it says limitations and plans for the future. This is a very important part of the discussion part. I think I've written this somewhere. Yeah. Approach and steps. So just to go back, now we have an idea. We have the information that's needed to write the discussion part. We know how to start and what are the main points. Now, and we also talked about how to write it. We write in present tense. Previous results, we write them in past tense. Now, the approach and steps. Restate your research problem is step number 1. I want you to focus with me because these 2 slides are actually the most important points about writing the discussion part. Once you know these, you can just like write a very good discussion part. Number 1, restate your research problem. What do I mean by restating your research problem? Like I said earlier, you are writing this research because you have a main problem. You start with it, you wrote everything else, and now you're at the discussion part. You have to restate your research problem. You can't just like dive in and be like, oh, p-value of this is this and this. Like, you have to reconnect back. And when I say reconnect, I don't mean repeating yourself. It's just writing a sentence that will just connect the reader to the main idea. So maybe you've previously mentioned your hypothesis in the background and your significance of the research. I want you to remind the reader again and just restate your research problem. And by restating it, you enter and dive deep into writing your discussion. The second part is answering your research question. So again, discussion part is very important because it's where the answer of the research question is. We've been taught that research question is very important. Hypothesis is very important. We've, like, I don't know, spent a million times just like trying to understand how to read out, how to write a very good research question. But I think we don't think a lot about where do we find the answer to the research question. People think that we find the answer to the research question in the results section, but this is not true. You find the answer to the research question with its significance and all the important details in the discussion part. So number 2, answer the research question. Number 3, analyze the problem you previously mentioned in your introduction. In the introduction part, I'm pretty sure someone presented something maybe in these meetings about the introduction part. In the introduction part, you usually display the problems that you propose in your research and you propose to find answers to. You say, oh, we're looking into seeing if this drug is effective in this and this condition, or we're looking if maybe avoiding this risk factor will decrease this outcome, or maybe prolong life. Like all of the problems that you list in your introduction, you have to analyze them now. Now is the time to analyze these problems in the discussion part. So a good approach to always go back and remember what you wrote in the introduction section, in the background section of your paper. And this is an important part because people normally, like, or a lot of people would forget what they wrote, and they would forget some of the points, like, and they'll leave information or questions that are unanswered, and their paper will just be back and be like, oh, you forgot to answer this. Where do you analyze this? Okay, so number 4, start with major findings. In your discussion part, start with major findings. Do not just like jump into tiny findings, maybe something about age that's unrelated to anything, or not age, like maybe socioeconomic. I'm not saying these are not important, but maybe they're not important in a very particular research. So don't start with these. Start with the main hypothesis, your major findings for that hypothesis, and then bring on the rest. Because if you start with the tiny details or tiny minor findings, the reader will be like, I don't think this was the, I don't think what, like this is what the research is about actually. I don't think the research is about age and mortality. I think the research is about this drug and this side effects. Why are we talking about this? So it's just like, it brings the reader in a state of, I don't know, like questioning your research paper. So you don't want the reader to feel that way. Start with your major findings and then move on to the next findings. Explain the meaning of the major findings and why are they important. Number 6, relate to similar studies. Please make sure to follow an appropriate sequence. Answer and then the results. And I'm going to explain it in a bit. Cite as you compare and refer to tables and figures if needed. Consider alternative explanations of the findings. Be honest and don't choose an explanation only because it fits your hypothesis. And number 8, unexpected findings. I'm going to repeat these tips, but let me move to the last 3 and then I'll explain them all again بالعربي as well. Number 9, future research suggestions. This could either be here or in the conclusion section. Number 10, limitations and weaknesses. Number 11, the end of the discussion section, just a concise summary of the implications of the findings. I'm going to go back only because this section is honestly the most important part of writing your discussion. Once you cover all of these points, you're good to go, and your discussion is going to be as amazing as it is. And I can promise you that. راح أعيدهم بالعربي لأن مرة مهمين. هذه النقاط لو عرفتوا هذه النقاط الدسكشن بارت حيكون فظيع. رقم 1 research problem. تكلموا عن المشكلة الأساسية اللي أنتوا أصلاً النقطة الأساسية حقت الريسيرش، الأيم الهدف حقك. رقم 2 جاوبوا الريسيرش كويستشن، يعني هذا المكان اللي تجاوبوا فيه سؤالك البحثي. سؤالك البحثي ما حد جاوبه في يعني صح تطلع ريزلت موجود، بس أنت ما جاوبت يعني بطريقة الشرح، بطريقة يعني شاملة. رقم 3 ارجع إلى الانترودكشن سكشن. هذا غلط كثير من الناس يقعوا فيه. يكتبوا أشياء في الانترودكشن، في نهاية الانترودكشن إنه والله هذا الريسيرش this research is I think by writing or by studying this we'll figure out this and this and this, or يعني يكتبوا أسئلة أنا ممكن أنا أسوي هذا الريسيرش لأنه أبغى أجاوب على هذه الأسئلة. I'm not saying about إنه أجاوب على أسئلة research question. A lot of people write تعرفوا عندنا primary aim, secondary aim, so there are a lot of questions that you want to navigate through and وتبغى تجاوبوا عليها. ففي ناس تنسى إيش كتبوا وما يتطرقوا لهم في الورقة البحثية، فيروح يسلموها حق جورنال ترجع لهم ترى highlighted أنتم ما جاوبتوا على هذا السؤال، وين المعلومة هذه. فدائما لما تكتبوا الدسكشن ارجعوا للانترودكشن وشوفوا إيش الأشياء اللي نسيتوها. ابدأوا بالميجر فايندينجز واشرحوها. نفس ما قلت ارجعوا قارنوا الريزلتس بريزلتس قديمة. دائما ابدأوا بالجواب بعدين الريزلتس، لأن لو بدأتوا بالريزلتس وقلتوا والله p values this and this it's like كأنك بدأت الحين الريزلت سكشن again. لا، لازم تكتب المعلومة أنا كذا المعلومة لأنه طلعت لنا البي فاليو كذا وبعدين تشرح إيش معناه. ولو في tables و figures يعني you point at them. رقم 7 نقطة مرة مهمة قلتها في البداية، دائما خليكم صادقين. يعني اكتبوا لو في alternative explanation، لو في شرح ثاني انت تتوقع خلى الريزلت كذا، ممكن في بايس في المعلومات، في الداتا فيها مشكله، فيها شيء، اكتبوا ايش تتوقعوا ممكن الريزلت طلعت كذا بسببه، مو عشان الريزلت طلعت توافق الهايبوثيسز حقك تطنش، لا خليك صادق علميا. يعني من جد من جد، يعني ممكن الناس تفكر لو انا طنشت هذا الشيء ما حد حيحس، بالعكس خليك، لان لو كنت صادق علميا حتكون البيبر very very strong. رقم 8 unexpected finding، لو طلع لك findings ما كنت تتصور حتطلع لازم تكتبها في الدسكشن. رقم 9 suggestions، تقول مقترحاتك، وتطرقنا للنقطة من قبل، تقول مقترحاتك ايش تتوقع هذا يفيد الريسيرش ويفيد العالم الطبي. رقم 10 وهي نقطة مرة مهمة، limitations and weaknesses، ايش نقاط الضعف حق الريسيرش حقك ولازم تكتبها. والله أنا الداتا حقتي ما كانت العدد كبير، فممكن عشان كذا النتائج ما تكون أقدر أطبقها على جميع البوبوليشن، يعني فهذا أحد limitations. There are so many limitations. فلازم تتطرق للlimitations، وبصورة مشابهة ممكن تتطرق وتقول إيش نقاط القوة في البحث حقك. في النهاية you summarize sentences or two discussion part. I know that it's almost time, بس حاول أخلص بسرعة. أصلاً we said the important parts. These are the common mistakes, and I've already mentioned them. Repeating results. We don't want two results sections. Do not repeat the results. ما أبغى أشوف research article وأشوف والله مرتين كاتبين الريزلتس، يعني بس العنوان مختلف فوق results وتحت discussion. This does not make sense. Common mistake، غلط ثاني، introduction of new results. فجأة أشوف results موجودة في discussion section مو موجودة في results، فانتبهوا لهذا الغلط. يعني اكتبوا كل الريزلتس في قسم الريزلتس بعدين تشرحوهم، مو تكتبوا نص الريزلتس وتقول أنا بحط بعض الريزلتس هنا وبعض الريزلتس في الدسكشن سكشن عشان حتكون معلومات جديدة. لا، this is not right. Over interpretation. Do not over interpret. خلاص، يعني if you think وصلت المعلومة لا تأخذ وتعطي مرة كثير. Be very precise and do not يعني avoid over interpretation. Again, this leads me to losing the road. لا تضيع الطريق. Focus on your research aim and population of interest. You have your research aim, you have your research question, you're good to go. You have everything you need, and you just have to focus on your research aim. Because if you just like ignore the aim and maybe just give the aim as, like write about it in a sentence or two and try to like explain your results in terms of a population you're not looking at or you're not examining, then me as a reader will question the integrity of this research, and it'll just give me a very bad vibe. And finally, when writing a manuscript, always remember these principles: simplicity, clarity, and effectiveness. مرة مهم. If you remember these three principles, من جد your writing will be awesome. وترى مرة سهل. فما تخلوا الخوف يتحكم فيكم. Always remember, keep it simple, keep it clear, keep it effective. My advice: read published research. حاولوا تقرأوا قد ما تقدروا من published papers، لأنه كل ما قرأتوا papers أصلاً يعني حصيلتكم العلمية في طريقة الكتابة حتزيد. Reread your manuscript. يعني أنت كتبتها، اقرأ بالليل، اقرأ بكرة، اقرأ بعدها بالويكند، اقرأ كل مرة تقرأ حتلاحظ أشياء جديدة، حتصحح، حتحس إنه لا مو مفهوم. Send it to your friends, your colleagues to read and give their opinions. It's okay. لأنه ممكن أنت تفهم طريقتك، ممكن طريقتك في النهاية ما تفهم يعني ما تنفهم من العامة، فحلو إنه يكون عندك opinions from different people opinion يعني. If needed, and it's very important honestly, take courses on scientific writing, and this is not only going to help you in the discussion part, but it's going to help you overall in writing a paper. And like I said earlier, don't let the language itself be the reason of why you think writing a discussion is very important, because even if your English, if your language is, if your first language is English, you might still not be as good in scientific writing. At the end, just remember, divide and concur. Always divide your idea. يعني وخلاص حاول تحتوي الidea واكتب كل شيء ممكن up to the point. I think that's the end of the presentation, and I thank you all, and I'm sorry I was maybe 5 minutes late, and there's so many things that I want to talk about maybe in like, I don't know, next meetings, or I can even share, I think this is recorded, I can share resources to I think one of the students who